kept my hand steady on the coffee mug while my son-in-law laid out his terms like he was reading from a lease agreement. "You've been living here 14 months, Victor said, sliding a piece of paper across the kitchen table. "That's 14 months of utilities, groceries, wear and tear. We figured it out. $2,000 a month. You owe us $28,000, or we start counting from today forward." My daughter Sasha sat beside him. She didn't look at me. She studied the grain of the wood table like she was memorizing it. I picked up the paper. I read it twice. Then I set it down and asked if anyone wanted more coffee. Victor looked at his wife. She looked at her hands. I got up, refilled my mug, and stood at the kitchen window looking out at the backyard, the one I had landscaped the summer before, the one where I'd built the raised garden beds from cedar planks I paid for myself. The hydrangeas I'd planted along the fence were just starting to come in. It was a Tuesday in April, cool enough that the window had a faint fog on it from the inside. I thought about everything I had done in the past 14 months. I thought about what I knew that they didn't know I knew. And then I thought about the folder sitting in the trunk of my car. I smiled, just barely, just enough that only I would notice. I had not always been the kind of man who kept records of everything. That came later, after 41 years working as a project manager for a mid-sized construction firm outside of Columbus, Ohio. You learn in that business that the only conversations that matter are the ones with paperwork attached. Verbal agreements are just memories, and memories shift depending on who needs them to shift. When my wife Pauline passed 7 years ago now, pancreatic cancer, 11 weeks from diagnosis to the end, I sold the house we'd raised our kids in and moved into a 2-bedroom apartment near the university. I was 63 years old. I had my pension from the firm, I had Pauline's life insurance policy, and I had roughly $240,000 in savings. I was not rich, but I was not struggling. Sasha was our younger one. She'd married Victor 3 years earlier in a ceremony at a vineyard out in Napa that cost more than my first house. I helped pay for it. I didn't say that at the time, and I didn't hold it over anyone. That's not how I was raised. Victor sold software to logistics companies. He was the kind of man who said bandwidth when he meant time and leverage when he meant money. He wore athletic clothing to situations that did not require athletic clothing. I never disliked him openly. I just never fully trusted him either, the way you don't fully trust a door that closes a little too smoothly. The trouble started when they bought the condo in Scottsdale. They had been living in a 2-bedroom rental in Phoenix for 2 years and wanted to buy. Victor's credit score had some damage from a business he'd tried to start in 2019 that didn't work out, and the debt from it was still showing. He came to me, just him, not Sasha, which I noticed, and explained that if my name was on the mortgage as co-signer, they could qualify for a much better rate. He walked me through the numbers. I asked questions. He had answers prepared, which I also noticed. I told him I'd think about it. I thought about it for 4 days, and then I talked to my accountant, a woman named Helen, who had done my taxes since Pauline was alive. Helen told me plainly, co-signing means you are equally responsible for the debt. If they stop paying, the bank comes to you. Your credit, your assets, your pension income, all of it is on the line. I went back to Victor and told him I would co-sign under one condition. We put together a written agreement, notarized, that clearly stated I was a co-signer only for the purpose of qualifying for the loan, that I held no ownership interest in the property, and that they would make all payments without my involvement. I also wanted a clause that if they ever missed 2 consecutive payments, they would notify me within 7 days so I could take action to protect my credit. Victor laughed, not a mean laugh, just a surprised one, like I'd asked him to do something unnecessarily complicated. "Dad, it's fine. We're family." "Write it down," I said, "and then it'll still be fine." He agreed. We had the agreement drawn up by a real estate attorney I hired. I paid for that too, and we both signed it in front of a notary at a UPS store on a Wednesday afternoon. I kept the original. I scanned it and saved it to 2 separate cloud accounts and printed a second copy that went into a fireproof box in my apartment. 8 months later, Sasha called me to say that Victor had been laid off. He was out of work for 5 months. During that time, they missed 3 mortgage payments. They did not call me to notify me as the agreement required. I found out when my credit monitoring service sent me an alert on a Sunday morning while I was making eggs. I called Sasha. She was apologetic. Victor was embarrassed. They said they had been handling it, that Victor had interviews lined up, that it would be fine. I told them I needed them to be current within 30 days, or I would need to explore my legal options to protect myself. Victor got a new job. They caught up on the payments. Things went quiet. Then my apartment building was sold to a developer who planned to convert the units to condos, and the existing tenants were given 90 days' notice to vacate. I was 66 years old, looking for a place to live in 90 days, and Sasha called before I had even started searching to say that they had a guest room and that I should come stay with them while I figured out my next step. I want to be clear about something. I was not naive. I am not a naive man. But she was my daughter. She was the child I had driven to piano lessons and soccer practice and the emergency room twice and college orientation. She was the child Pauline and I had sat up with when she was 17 and heartbroken for the first time. The child I had danced with at her wedding while a string quartet played a song Pauline had loved. When your child opens a door for you, you do not stand outside analyzing the architecture of the door frame. I moved in with 2 suitcases, my toolbox, and the fireproof box. The first 3 months were fine. I fixed things around the condo, a leaking faucet, a bathroom exhaust fan that had been rattling since before I arrived, a section of baseboard that had come loose in the hallway. I cooked dinner twice a week. I did my own grocery runs and contributed to the household groceries without being asked. I stayed out of their space. I tried to be a guest who earned his keep. But I had my eyes open. I noticed things. I noticed that Victor began working from home full-time, and that the second bedroom, the one I was sleeping in, had been his home office before I arrived. I noticed that he had moved his desk and equipment into the living room, and that he resented it, quietly, the way men resent things they won't say directly. I noticed that Sasha started talking to me differently. Shorter answers. Less warmth. The way people talk when they've been having a private conversation about you that you weren't supposed to know about. I started keeping a log. Nothing dramatic, just a small notebook I kept in my nightstand drawer. Dates, observations, conversations I wanted to remember. Old project manager habit. In month 5, Victor mentioned casually that a friend of his had rented out a room in his house and it had worked out well financially. He said it in the way people say things that are actually questions they don't want to ask directly. In month 7, Sasha asked if I had thought about buying a condo of my own. I told her I had been looking. I had not been looking as actively as I should have, and that was my own fault, and I knew it even then. In month 9, Sasha told me that they were thinking about converting the second bedroom back into an office because Victor's company was now requiring him to be on video calls most of the day and the lighting in the living room wasn't good. She said it gently. She said they could get me a sofa bed for the living room just temporarily. I told her I would accelerate my search for a place. In month 11, Victor got a raise and they refinanced the condo. I was still the co-signer. I was not informed about the refinancing until after it had already been processed. When I asked to see the new loan documents, Victor said he'd have to find them. He never found them. I called the mortgage servicer myself and confirmed that I was still on the loan, that the refinance had extended the term, and that the new monthly payment was actually $40 less than before. Small information, but I wrote it down. In month 12, I found a condo I liked in a 55 and older community in Tempe. Reasonable price, good HOA, a small pool. I made an offer. It was accepted. I was 60 days from closing. I told Sasha. She seemed relieved. She hugged me and said she was happy for me. Victor shook my hand. 3 weeks later, they sat me down at the kitchen table. Victor had the paper ready. The itemized list. 14 months at $2,000 a month. He presented it calmly, like a contractor presenting a bill. He said they understood family was family, but that they had done the math and the arrangement had cost them more than they'd anticipated, and they wanted to be compensated before I moved out. He also said, and I want to make sure I am precise here because this is the part that took me a moment to absorb, that if I did not want to pay the $28,000 in cash, they would consider accepting a lien on the Tempe condo. My condo. the one I had not yet closed on. He said it conversationally, like he was offering me an alternative payment plan as a favor. Sasha was quiet. I picked up the paper. I read it. I set it down. I asked if anyone wanted more coffee. I went to the window. I looked at the hydrangeas. And I thought about the folder in my trunk. Here is what Victor did not know. He did not know that I had called Helen, my accountant, the same week I moved in, and that Helen had connected me with an attorney named Charles who specialized in real estate and cosigner disputes. I had not hired Charles then. I just wanted to know who he was and how to reach him. He did not know that I had documented every contribution I had made to their household during my stay, not as a grievance, just as a record. I had receipts for groceries totaling over $4,000. I had a photograph dated and time-stamped of every repair I had done, with materials costs attached. I had spent $1,100 on supplies for this condo alone. I had paid the HOA landscaper $250 to trim the palm trees in the backyard when Victor said the HOA fee didn't cover individual units. He did not know that when they refinanced without telling me, I had called Charles and asked what my options were. Charles told me that as a cosigner, I had the right to request a release from the loan, and that if the primary borrowers had sufficient income and credit history to qualify on their own, which, given Victor's new salary, they likely did, they had an obligation to pursue that release if I requested it formally. I had drafted that letter. I had not sent it yet. He did not know that a family law, an estate attorney I had also consulted, a woman referred to me by someone in my 55 and older community, had reviewed the original cosigner agreement and confirmed that it contained no provision entitling either party to compensation for housing costs, and that any attempt to claim a lien on separate property I had not yet acquired would constitute an attempted unauthorized encumbrance, which is a civil matter with potential damages. He did not know any of that. He thought he was sitting across from a 66-year-old retired man who needed a place to stay and might not push back. I turned from the window. I sat back down at the table. I looked at Victor. I looked at my daughter. I looked at the paper between us. I said, I want you both to understand that I have appreciated your hospitality. I have tried to be a good guest, and I believe the record shows that I have contributed meaningfully to this household. I am going to respond to this document formally through my attorney within 10 business days. In the meantime, I'd like to give you both something to consider. I went to my room. I got the folder from where I'd brought it in that morning. I had known, somehow, that this conversation was coming. I had not known it would be so soon or so direct, but I had known. I came back to the table and I set the folder down. I did not open it. I just placed my hand on top of it. I explained that I had documentation of my contributions to their household totaling over $5,300 in direct costs. I explained that I had the original cosigner agreement and that I had been in contact with legal counsel regarding my right to request a release from the mortgage loan, which I intended to file formally within the same 10 business days. I explained that a release request, if denied or ignored, would trigger a formal review process that would involve scrutiny of their current financial disclosures, including the refinancing they had completed, without my knowledge or consent, while I was still a cosigner. An action that, according to my attorney, may have been a breach of the original agreement. Victor's expression changed. Not dramatically. He wasn't the kind of man who showed things dramatically, but something behind his eyes recalculated. Sasha looked at him. He looked at the folder. I said, I have no interest in making this difficult for either of you. I want to move into my condo on schedule and live quietly and not speak to lawyers again for the rest of my life. I believe that is also what you want. So let's talk about how we get there. There was a long silence. Victor picked up his paper, the one with the $28,000 figure on it, and he folded it in half. He set it to the side. He said he hadn't realized I had counsel involved already. I said I had learned a long time ago that it's better to have counsel before you need it urgently than to find yourself needing it urgently without it. Another silence. He said maybe they'd been too hasty. I said I appreciated that. Over the following 2 weeks, Charles sent a formal letter requesting my release from the mortgage. Given that Victor had been employed for over 18 months at his new company with a significantly higher income, and that Sasha had also returned to part-time work, they qualified to carry the loan independently. The mortgage servicer confirmed this during a routine evaluation. Victor, to his credit, did not fight it. I think he understood by then that the ground he was standing on was considerably less solid than he'd thought. On a Thursday morning in early June, I signed the release documents at Charles's office. I was no longer a co-signer on any loan. My credit report, which I checked the following Monday, was clean and unencumbered. 3 weeks after that, I closed on the Tempe condo. I paid cash, a portion of my savings combined with a modest withdrawal from an investment account Helen had helped me set up years before. No co-signers needed. No one else's name on the deed. Just mine. I moved in on a Saturday. I assembled a bookshelf in the afternoon and made chicken piccata for dinner, eating alone at a small table by the window that looked out onto the courtyard. There was a fountain out there, a simple one, just water moving over stacked stone. I could hear it faintly from inside. Sasha called that evening. We talked for 11 minutes. It was not a warm conversation, but it was not hostile either. She said she hoped I was settling in okay. I said I was. I asked about her week. She answered briefly. We said goodbye. I don't know what she and Victor said to each other after they sat back down at that kitchen table the afternoon I put my hand on the folder. I don't know what she thought watching her husband fold up that paper and set it aside. I hope, somewhere in the part of her that is still my daughter and Pauline's daughter, she felt something shift, some recognition of what she had almost been part of, and what she still had the chance not to be. I kept the folder. It's in the fireproof box now, with the original co-signer agreement, the release documents, and the deed to the condo. I watered the small succulent on my windowsill every Sunday. I drive to Helen's office every April with a manila envelope of receipts. I play cards on Tuesday nights with 4 other men from the community, one of whom is a retired judge who tells stories that make the rest of us feel better about the human race. Pauline would have said that carrying bitterness is like carrying a bag of gravel everywhere you go. She would have told me to put it down. She was usually right about things like that. I'd put it down, but I kept the paperwork. I think about that Tuesday in April more than I probably should. Not with anger, that burned off a long time ago, but with a kind of quiet clarity. The way you see a road clearly only after you've already driven it. What Victor did was calculated. What Sasha did was worse in its own way, because it was passive. She sat at that table and said nothing. And I've had to make peace with the fact that a person can love you and still let someone use them as a weapon against you. That's not a contradiction I could have understood at 30. At 66, I understand it completely. The thing is, Victor didn't fail because he was clever. He failed because he mistook patience for weakness. He looked at a retired man living in his guest room and saw someone who had run out of options. He never stopped to ask why that man had spent 41 years managing large construction projects, jobs where a single missed document could cost a company hundreds of thousands of dollars. He never asked what kind of habits a man builds over 4 decades of making sure every agreement is in writing before a single nail goes in. That folder existed because of who I had trained myself to be, not because I had expected to need it against my own family. I've thought about what Pauline would say about all of it. She was a more forgiving person than I am. She would have grieved the relationship harder, longer. She would have found a way to keep the door open wider than I've managed to, but she also would have kept the paperwork. She was the one who taught me to read the fine print on our very first mortgage, sitting at the kitchen table with a highlighter and a yellow legal pad. She said, "You don't read the contract because you expect trouble. You read it because you respect yourself enough to know what you agreed to. Decency matters. Doing right by people, contributing, not taking more than you're owed. I pay for groceries I didn't have to pay for. I fixed things I had no obligation to fix. I tried, genuinely tried, to be a presence in that home that added something. That's not weakness. That's the floor you build under yourself so that when someone tries to drag you down, you have something solid to stand on. But decency without clear thinking is just vulnerability. You have to understand the situation you're actually in, not the one you wish you were in. I had to see Victor clearly, not as the man I hoped my daughter had married, but as the man who had quietly moved his debt risk onto my credit report and then tried to convert my goodwill into a lien on my home. Seeing that clearly, without flinching, without telling myself a more comfortable story, That took something. And then you have to act. Not from anger, not from hurt, but from the settled knowledge that you have done the work and the record supports you. Sending that release request letter was not a dramatic moment. I drafted it at my kitchen table on a Tuesday night, printed 2 copies, and put one in the fireproof box. That was it. The work had already been done. The courage wasn't in the confrontation. It was in all the quiet Tuesdays before it. I'd put it down, but I kept the paperwork.